Great. So hi, welcome to this Open Security Summit session. This is actually on a topic that I think we covered a lot, but we never really zoomed in with a whole number of experts. So it's really good to spend a bit of time talking about mental health in cybersecurity, and we have a whole number of experts who are going to give us a great panel on it. So Daniel, over to you.
Awesome. Thanks, Dennis. Thanks, everybody joining us in real time, those of you joining us via the stream and also asynchronously post-event. Quick introduction myself and our panelists and what brought us all together. Then I'll make a few comments about mental health and cybersecurity to kick us off, and then we'll bring the panelists in for their contributions from their areas of expertise as well, and ultimately get to a pretty flowing discussion within this hour. So my name is Dr. Daniel Shore. I have a PhD in workplace psychology. I spent 5 years with US and European funding studying cybersecurity teamwork and co-founded a company, Multi-Team Solutions, to bring that research to teams and also continue expanding on the body of research around cybersecurity teamwork, which has also expanded to include mental health and well-being and stress and burnout and things that are in that Venn diagram. I'm a member of the executive steering group for the Mental Health and Cybersecurity Foundation, along with our esteemed panelists, Pete Olivier, Beck McKeown, and Kashyap Thimmaraju, Dr. Kashyap Thimmaraju. And we're very excited to have, we also have Paul Sims, who might be joining us today, and as one of the founding members with Pete, and also in our audience, a founding member of the foundation, Sarb Sembhi. So very excited to bring this group together and then include everyone who's here in real time, as well as continuing the conversation beyond just this session. The Mental Health and Cybersecurity Foundation exists because the use of technology is a human task. And so whether an organization is looking to get the most out of that technology and or care for the people who are driving that technology and how it's applied, mental health matters. The foundation's explicit mission is to improve mental health and well-being among cybersecurity professionals, and to do that by creating a collaborative environment among this community and also bringing in allies of the community to enhance mental health, well-being, and the professional satisfaction of cybersecurity professionals. So it's really a grassroots movement and requires both commitment from our steering group as well as the commitment of those who are looking to join the community, contribute, and also benefit from being part of the community. I want to start with a few remarks before opening it up for our panelists. And so when I looked at the title of the session and I thought to myself, mental health in cybersecurity, what are we talking about? And a few different things came to mind. One is the need for cybersecurity professionals to be mentally prepared and supported to do the work that they're tasked with doing. It also, from a different angle, could be the initiatives that organizations and external supporters of the community are providing to bolster mental health and cybersecurity. And thirdly, it's the personal and professional survival, the mental, emotional, and physical health, because mental health is not only limited to the cognitive effects and cognitive resilience of people, but it affects everything we do, both inside and outside of work, and that a majority of cybersecurity professionals are continuously fighting for that type of survival as they come up against this never-ending barrage of challenges from adversaries, both internally and externally, both intentionally and unintentionally. So really, there's just a lot to unpack. And so I want to frame this hour together as the continuation an early start to a conversation, but there is much more work to be done individually and together as we go through this. The last thing I'll say from my perspective, which is workplace psychology, is thinking about how individuals feel and how that feeling influences their behavior. And so before I turn over to the panel, I'll make this statement, which is that in cybersecurity, we have a lot of professionals who are siloed or isolated as individuals. You become interested in cybersecurity as individuals, you train as individuals, you are hired and certified as individuals, and yet the work requires more than any one person can take on. And so I want to invite us all to be in compassion and empathy and support of each other as we go through this hour and beyond. That's kind of the what. And our panelists are going to dive deeper into the why, the when, and the how that relates to mental health and cybersecurity. So with that, I'd like to ask each panelist, as you make your first contribution to the conversation today, to introduce yourself and then share some of that insight that you have. And I'll start with Beck, identifying you as our opening panelist to share, which is your perspective on why. Why is cybersecurity so susceptible to these mental health challenges? What makes it unique from other workplace environments? And how do we start to wrap our head around, the empathy that comes from, what it means to work in this industry?
Sure, thank you. My name is Beck McKeown. I'm a chartered psychologist, and I have 20 years experience in working in defence and cybersecurity sector. My background in defence is really where I'm coming from with this conversation, because what I see there is an awful lot of parallels between people who work in defence and also in cybersecurity. And I don't mean the obvious warfighting comparisons. What I'm talking about is teams who are continually operating at a heightened level of vigilance. And with cybersecurity, whether that is normal day-to-day business operations or at a time if they're dealing with an incident, you still are working at that heightened state. In military, we use an acronym called VUCA, VUCA, and that stands for volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. And it's quite obvious why that is applicable to the military, but certainly in cybersecurity, it is a volatile environment. It changes very quickly. It can change extremely. So even with normal day-to-day business operations, business models change. Therefore, the attack surface changes. I mean, look at the pandemic, prime example for a volatile environment. Uncertainty, well, it's difficult in times of an attack to know how much an attacker already knows about your organisation, which tactics they're going to deploy. But also, generally, on a day-to-day basis, it's difficult to know at any given moment exactly the state of the company assets. Complexity, it is complex because it's global. It's multiple countries, multiple cultures, multiple regulatory environments. All the devices are interconnected in a way that we haven't been in a very long time. And also ambiguity. It's very difficult to have a clear and immediate insight into what's going on. You've got an overwhelming amount of data to have a look at. So the whole thing really, to me, is about that heightened state of vigilance. That impacts on mental health in two ways. It can lead to fatigue and obviously impact of stress. And the output of that is that burnout, but also increased error. So you're increasing risk if your cybersecurity team have not got good mental well-being. So that's my take on the environment itself. I think it's all lining up to make things difficult for anybody who works in cybersecurity.
Yeah, it's really an aggregation of some of the most challenging environmental factors that drive this. So yeah, I appreciate that. Paul, thanks for joining us. I know you're a bit under the weather, so feel free to guide us on how much you're able to contribute. But Pete, we'll go to you next. And building off what Beck shared, if you can introduce yourself and share a little bit about your perspective on that, what happens, when the why comes in, how does that impact the way that people navigate this space in their workplace?
Hi, Daniel. Thank you very much for the opportunity, and hello to everybody tuned in or listening live. My background is one of change delivery and being professional delivery manager, essentially, and having been in the security space for the last 10 or so years, what I've identified really is that the opportunities for us to get overwhelmed are tremendous. And as leaders in security, we have a responsibility to make sure that our teams can function effectively, can make sure that we are able to manage the workload that comes our way. Now, some of that we have control over, and some of it we don't. So it's about managing those aspects of the workload that we can manage and dealing with the impact of those areas that we can't manage. So security leaders, we've not only got to make sure that our teams are okay, but they're actually doing well. So how can we control that workload? How can we make sure they're rested, trained, and ready for things when they become difficult? And I'm going to talk a little bit to the points that Beck made earlier. You know, the bootcamp model is very strong. And if we look at that and figure out how we deal with each one of those elements, by setting out a vision and our strategy for the organization and getting buy-in, we can remove some of that ambiguity. We understand what it is that we're looking to achieve, where we want to get to, and how we need to get there. And we get the buy-in from the rest of the business to do that, so that with their support and being integrated with them and actively aligned to the business and the focus that the business needs us to be aligned with, we have a very simple and singular company-wide perspective on what we need to be doing, which reduces some of that complexity. By working with the business to understand where we should be focusing our efforts, we're able to bring the awareness of impacts of that uncertainty into focus when we need to. So being aware of those things that we can't impact and providing the right level of support for those people that are working in those aspects of our operation, who are largely at the mercy of external influences, and giving them the opportunity to operate in a psychologically safe environment where the consequences of decisions that they've made are not necessarily going to be held against them. They're not going to be held entirely accountable for that. They're going to be given support in the situation where they're going to make difficult decisions quickly. And by doing that, we reduce the consequences of uncertainty. So again, we're reducing the stress and the workload on people. And then finally, if we look at making sure that we are prioritizing the work, that we're focusing on the stuff that we need to do, and providing some degree of support to make sure that those priorities don't change on a regular basis, causing cavitation and friction and difficulties of understanding where we're going, and a sense of some of that work that we've done already being lost. We generate an environment that is a little bit more in our control. And by doing that, we're able to bring people, process, and tech into play in a way that is equal investments, or even better, an investment in people that drives process and tech. And that helps us to create a positive environment. And I've seen that happen in our organization over the last 5 or 6 years, where we had a very broad strategy and vision, and wasn't fully aligned with the business. And it generated a huge amount of frustration and nervousness and stress in the team. And over time, we've actually worked very closely with the business and our teams to refine that. And we've really seen a massive improvement in the level of engagement of the rest of the business and support, and spreading that responsibility of securing the business out throughout the business, because they understand where we're going. They can read, they can buy into the vision, and they can understand the strategy and be part of it. And it now becomes a much broader base to carry that load. So in short, we as leaders need to look at this and be very accountable to ourselves and to the broader business at an executive level of what we're experiencing, what we're going through, and talk about it and make it more part of the conversation, a normal conversation about how do we get stronger and better.
Awesome. Yeah, Pete, thank you for that. I'm going to reflect briefly on what Beck and Pete have shared. I know some people are also just joining, and then Paul and Cash, you'll be up next. From Beck's perspective, this VUCA environment, volatile, uncertain, complex, ambiguous. There's just a lot of moving pieces. It's highly dynamic, very quickly changing, and it's a high volume of change and information that's coming, onto people at all levels of cybersecurity organizations. Pete, to your point, to pair it with what Beck shared, is that within that environment that's incredibly dynamic, there are just an innumerable number of angles to approach these challenges, from the organizational level to the executive level to mid-level leaders to the front line, and that the recommendation is to get precise and identify what's an initiative you can take. Because, right, if you're working in a VUCA environment and you have an innumerable number of options on how to approach it, to reduce the stress and mitigate burnout, then we end up with paralysis by analysis of how we're going to tackle this, infinitely headed monster. So we need to pick opportunities and start somewhere, right? We have to incremental change will lead to radical shifts within the industry over time, but it can really come from all levels of the organization. It can be top down, can also be bottom up, and everything in between. And so with that, I want to continue the momentum we have of the complexity paired with the precision. And Paul, get your perspective, if you'd introduce yourself and share a little bit about where you come into this conversation, and then Cash will come to you for some of that applied research angle.
Hi, thank you, Daniel. Good evening, everyone. My name is Paul Sims. I'm a global cyber resilience director for a life sciences company. I've been in IT for over 35 years, and in the last 10 years focusing mainly on cybersecurity, but doing cybersecurity from the beginning of my life, working on very, very, very old computers right through to modern times. Now, despite the environments that we deal with, the challenges we have with internal politics, the external circumstances of things like pandemics, geopolitical atmospheres that we have where we can have nation state attacks, the one thing that remains centered for all of us is that we all work, or most of us work within a team, whether that team be remote or in a single location. And one of the things that we need to foster for those teams is that they can talk to each other, they can talk to other people, because the teams are often the ones facing the most stress. Sometimes us as managers, we're far removed from the team. We can make a decision without actually realizing the impact on an individual or on the team. In the DevSec environment, I've seen two different examples of this, where one was very task driven, and almost every member of the team with their different skills felt burnout, felt that they couldn't talk to each other because there was very much a focus on their individual skills rather than the fact that they were working as one team together. In the other team that I'd witnessed, where the driver was about them being a happy team to be a more productive team, they were encouraged to be social together, go out together. The team build was very, very strong. So somebody who was suffering and more challenges came through, the team picked up the challenges rather than the individual picked up the challenge. So I think from that point of view, considering what we understand about the volatility of certain environments, certain circumstances, that we need to strengthen the idea of team. Yes, people should have the power to be empowered and feel autonomous, but they should also feel they're in a, as Peter said, a psychologically safe environment, that there is no subject that is taboo that they can't talk about if they're feeling pressured, because we also talk about the stigma of the phrase that we use called mental health. I do like some of the examples given by Peter for how they do best practice, where they talk about well-being champions and things like that. So language, building a connection with people within your team or within your area, I think are very, very important things. Yes, there is always something that we need to achieve, but you cannot achieve it in isolation or in a silo. And for me, the strongest message I want to give this evening is consider yourself part of something bigger, and the fact that you should be able to share as part of something bigger. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Paul. And that resonates across cybersecurity as a mantra that we're all in this together. And I think our charge here, our mandate, is to bring that down to the people, and not just at the industry level or across organizations or government, but really to remind people that we are all in this together. Not we, the large cyber, but we as individuals and people, and like each individual's experience within this volatile ecosystem gets to transcend those barriers, those silos, and really be in support of each other. Kash, I'll turn over to you to share your perspective, introduce yourself, and we'll hear what you bring into this conversation.
Thanks, Daniel. My name is Kashyap Thimmaraju. I actually have a PhD in computer science, in particular computer security. But I'm also the founder of FlowGuard Institute, which is a research and training company aimed at human performance and mental health in cybersecurity. And before I touch upon, let's say, some of the research, I wanted to sort of also connect some of the dots that Beck, Pete, and Paul just mentioned. What I also think about what makes cyber different is also the asymmetry, the asymmetric win the attacker has, because the attacker merely needs to win one time in some sense, and they've compromised the system, whereas cybersecurity professionals or the security teams working in an organization have to constantly defend the system. And that can be very tiring. And I think that connects also with what Paul just mentioned, the sense of purpose and meaning. And so I think a lot of people who work in cybersecurity have this purpose and meaning, where they believe they're defending the systems, they are saving our digital assets, they're securing our resources, and it's really meaningful. But it becomes challenging because of not only the whole VUCA, but also there's also sometimes a lack of resources, financial resources, human resources. Teams are often understaffed. People have to do more with less. That also, I believe, drives high stress and eventually leads to burnout. And this has then the consequence of people leaving the industry. So that simply exacerbates the situation. We already have a shortage of cybersecurity staff. And now if people are leaving, that's actually reducing the actual workforce that we have. I also wanted to mention something that Pete mentioned about workload. I think that's also something that's shown up a lot in the research. There have been a number of surveys conducted by, let's say, various companies that asked a number of people working in either security operations or CISOs and different roles as consultants and so on. And something that really comes to light is the fact of workload. And I think what Pete mentioned about, identifying the priorities, preventing those priorities from changing, that's actually huge, because then people can actually focus and they don't have that kind of stress and have to pick up something new and learn something, or like all that work that they did is just gone down the drain in some sense. I think that's also super important. I also wanted to mention about I think the word team was also mentioned multiple times. And I think teams play a crucial role, because if we build trust within the team, then even if people are stressed or if they feel they have too much on their plate, somebody else can take pick it up for them. Or, if someone has the power or the capability to take something off the plate, say, okay, that's not our priority, that can also help. And so this trust and partnership, not only within the team, but across the team, so across the security team, across the different business units or business groups within the organization, is crucial in driving that stress down. I think what's also really important is to open up this dialogue and help, let's say, the leadership team understand security, understand how computers work, why it's actually important, why we have to make these decisions, because cybersecurity is also a very high stakes environment. There are in the US, you have certain rules or laws requiring people to report within 48 hours there's a breach, but sometimes it's just not possible to actually do that, and you might not have enough information when a company is breached about all the information that's required to be reported, and we might actually provide false information, and that's actually also a very stressful environment. So I think cybersecurity is quite challenging, and it can really help for people to have resources to be able to cope with what they're going through in their environment, and also have certain practices and have the sort of acceptance within the team that, okay, you don't have to always be working. You need to take a break. You need to actually do something about it. But I might be sort of skipping the line here, but I'll sort of end here and pass it back to you, Daniel.
Yeah, you're never moving too fast. We got to fit a lot in here. We're gonna open it up for some Q&A in the next 15 to 20 minutes, and give some space for that as well, for those of you that are joining. I want to pull out some of the themes that you all are sharing. From the top down, it's acknowledging the challenges, and then with precision identifying some of those initiatives. From the bottom up, it's getting people to connect with each other, and to remind everyone here that a team can be two people. So getting one person to connect with one other person is a start. Getting a whole team, 5, 7, 10 people, to all be in connection, that takes time. It's possible. It's a great aspirational goal. But if you're currently have a lot of people who are in isolation, start somewhere. Open up one channel of communication and connection for that. And the other thing I'm hearing is vulnerability, which requires that psychological safety, that trust, that you've all spoken to. And, creating that in a VUCA environment is really challenging, because when do you have time to do that when you are constantly under pressure to perform, constantly under pressure to respond, constantly under pressure to have an answer, becomes really difficult. And so I want to share some quick data points from a report that I put out recently that I will guide us into this next set of questions. And so for the panelists, I'll tee you up for the next question, which is, how do we open up those channels of communication? How do we create trust and a sense of safety, psychological and beyond? And how do we build opportunity? How do we build space for people to have vulnerability, or to, if that word is a bit intimidating, to at least share how they're feeling and what support they need? So that's what I want us to get into, is kind of that approach from your personal experience, from your expertise, whether it's research or in the applied world, or spanning both. But how do we do that? How do we make those incremental shifts? What's our next step? So I'll get to that in a moment. I'll share just some highlights from this report, which is, we surveyed 173 folks at Black Hat Europe in December of last year, and 89% said they see themselves as being moderately to extremely resilient. 80% of that same set of respondents said they're going to burn out within the next 3 years. 35% of them in the next 6 months. where burnout is lacking the motivation to do their job effectively. And Cash, you hit on this, that they're going to leave. And there's a secondary problem, which is if they don't leave the industry, they go to another organization. They're there for 6 months of a honeymoon period, and then they're burning out again. And so, as we need to address this by getting people to share what they need, and then having the support systems in place. Pete, Paul, you spoke to these to actually support them and create space in those VUCA environments for them to do so. And who do they turn to as the last piece I'll share from the report, which is 80% of them said they'd feel comfortable telling their supervisor. But the supervisor is also burning out. The sample included everyone from CISOs to frontline analysts. So this problem is pervasive across all levels of the organization, and it keeps getting pushed down, from the board to the senior level management, to directors, to supervisors, to team members. And so we have this, again, multifaceted challenge that we're looking to address. I'll share a link to the report for where those data points came from, and I'll turn it now back to the panelists and let you join in. Beck, I know your video is frozen, although you look very astute in the image that we've been left with. So feel free to use a hand raise or just speak up. But panelists, in the next 10 minutes or so, I'd love for us to share with the audience a little bit about how do we move this needle slightly forward? Just what's that incremental shift so that we can get beyond the paralysis and into the interventions. Yeah, Beck, go ahead.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things going on here. You talked early on in your last little bit of speech just there about psychological safety, and the report sort of telling us that actually maybe psychological safety is kind of there anyway. If people are happy to talk to their supervisors, they're happy to talk to each other. I mean, that is one of the big components of psychological safety, is to establish open and respectful communication culture. So that's one step on the way there. Being transparent to build trust. Now, this is, to me, is quite interesting, because you can be transparent with each other, but are you being transparent up the chain as far as board level? Because what you tend to find in organisations is that those at the top don't necessarily see what's going on right at, on the front line, as it were, because people aren't transparent all the way up. So I wonder if there's that sort of, there is some open and respectful communication culture, but is there clear transparency about the nature of where things are within the teams and within individuals? So that's a question I think would be interesting to explore. Other ways of looking at it about sort of not looking at failure, but reframing mistakes as learning opportunities. And this is something that's quite prevalent in the aviation industry, where I've also done an awful lot of research where they have a just culture. So people aren't given a warning or put under any sort of scrutiny in a negative way for when things go wrong. They're merely asked to sort of let us know how we got to that so we can learn from it. So it's about that, developing that sort of culture as well. I'd be interested to know, perhaps, Paul, from an organisational perspective, from your experience, how does that sit with you?
Thank you. Absolutely right. What experience I've had in the past with some of the organisations I've worked with is that when they started looking at building it into the one-to-one session. So we would talk about things like, have you made a connection with a member of the team or within the organisation? And that was seen as part of your development, is to say that you were growing as an individual, you were contacting other people, and also that there's a survey that some companies do where they have the 12 question, and one of them is, do you have a best friend at work? Kind of thing. Some of them adopt those approaches, but it's back to what you say is change in the language. So it's not punitive language, it's coaching language, but also the fact that we grow the business social to the point that people look forward to coming into the office. And because it's where you spend most of your time, you should feel happy in the environment that you work. And you try and seek conversations where you seek out the point of people being happy. The other thing I liked about what you talked about when you just mentioned about, are they being transparent upwards? Because quite often you get the white paint or the painting scenario where where somebody walks through, it's almost as if they can smell paint because everybody's given them the fine answer. It's all been whitewashed. Everything's everything's good, everything's fine because they believe they need to say what the management want to hear as opposed to what the management need to hear, and that is a challenge in itself. I do find it happens in all different organizations, even ones that think that they're most relaxed. And then you find out from the individuals behind closed doors that they actually don't feel the way that they've said, but they've just said what they thought needed to be said. And the other thing about transparency is I think we need to take it down to the individual themselves. Are they being transparent with themselves? I remember you saying, Daniel, about some of the guys, 89% said they were self-sufficient. I've been in a situation, and most of us have been in a situation where people have come to check on us, and we said, "No, we're fine, we're fine." And actually, on the inside, we're totally not fine. So I do think we need the transparency. We have to be honest with ourselves as well.
That's great. I've unmuted myself, Daniel. I can't find the button to put my hand up. I don't use Zoom very often, so I'd like to just reinforce what Paul said there, and I think it's very difficult for us to individually assess whether we're okay or not, because we have this commitment escalation built into us. So we're heading down a path. It gets harder. Well, let's just work a bit harder, and we'll overcome it. And that gradually increments, and we lose our reference points. So sometimes it's important for our colleagues to be very honest with us and very open with us. And I think it's up to us to be able to recognize that willingness to help and take that message on board at a time that our judgment is probably impaired. We're tired. We're probably exhausted, and somebody comes to us and tells us that we're suffering in that way. You know, it's very difficult for us to stop, listen, take it on board, and then share that message more widely, because we kind of see it as a bit of a sign of weakness. So as leaders, I think it's important for us to demonstrate those behaviors and be able to lead by example, by giving people the opportunity to see our vulnerabilities, recognize them, and actually ask the team in some cases to help us. I think that all adds to owning that problem, you know, and actually, when seeing there's no bad consequences to it, it's more likely to get people to open up and share with you, you know, their circumstance, their perception of themselves and of you.
Yeah, great. Cash, jump in.
Yeah, I think what struck me was what Paul mentioned about language. I think that's really important, and to sort of have you know, like a simple thing like compare "you should do this by tomorrow" versus "I want you to do this by tomorrow." I mean, it's something very small right now, but I think communication language is a huge thing. I think, Daniel, you've also talked about this previously as well, right? The soft skills in some sense is something that people need. And that's also something I've noticed in the research, is that a lot of times companies or enterprises are willing to invest in training, and that training is primarily for or aimed at, okay, how do you learn this new tool? How do you sort of reverse engineer? How do you do binary analysis? How do you do API security, and so on? There's very little opportunity for, let's say, the security teams or individuals to actually develop these soft skills or these communication skills or skills that can help them manage their workload. How can they sort of cope with stress? I've spoken to someone, and what they said was, for, let's say, the CFO, it's easier to write off security training because that actually has some, let's say, tangible value compared to signing off some training that doesn't do that. And the other thing, I think it's sometimes people who tend to be stressed out might see training as additional work, and then they feel they don't have the time to go through that training. And that's sort of a challenge. I mean, I'm putting it out there. I don't have a solution to that, but I think that's also something that needs to be accounted for in some sense. And how can we put in these supportive structures to accommodate for these situations?
Yeah, I see the mics, I see the hands. We eager panelists. I want to acknowledge our time. So I'll give everybody 30 seconds to weigh in. I'll summarize, and then we're going to get to, we have at least one question already in the chat that we'll get to. So 30 seconds for each of you to jump in, and then we'll keep this moving. All right, Pete.
I'll go ahead. So I think it's a very good point, and we need to create the opportunity for people to develop, and we need to be active about it, because it's very difficult for people to create that time for themselves. So let's create it. Let's give them the opportunity, build development paths for them, and give them the opportunity to excel.
Excellent. Thank you for that. Beck or Paul?
Yeah, my sort of contribution to that is it's about micro learning. The days of going on a training course don't have to be a thing anymore. It's about little nibbles as and when you can. And I did see some research, I can't remember where I saw it now, but it was about actually if you're building learning skills into your project management way of doing things, so you're learning those skills in a just-in-time way the minute that you need them. It's quick bites of small training that you immediately then put into practice is far more effective than looking at taking time out to go on training schemes. Paul, handing over to you, 30 seconds.
All right, thanks, Beck.
Well done.
I just wanted to say, for one thing, was giving credit to Beck. It was Beck who actually brought up the language, and I expanded on the language, but it did actually come from Beck. And yes, I do believe in the fact that we can do more very quickly in small bites, but also making sure that people understand training is part of their job, so that they don't feel that they're losing out.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you all, and I appreciate your commitment to the time constraints we have. Skills. It's about training, right? Lots of people come into manager positions, supervisor positions without training to be in those positions from a supporting your people point of view. To the idea of language from Beck, Cash, what you brought up. If we say, I need this by then, as opposed to how can I support you to get this to me by then, that's a big shift. Although the manager or supervisor offering that support has to have the training for the language, as you all alluded to, and also to actually do the support piece, which could play into their technical expertise, which is really why they have been at the organization as long as they have been. The piece about how we're wired and, wanting to better connect one-to-one than maybe in large groups. I mean, I see this in the trainings I run. If you put people in pairs and you say, talk about what you're learning and how you're going to bring it back, I mean, uproarious, volume in the room. If you say, hey, everybody, let's stop in this room of 20 people. Who wants to share? Silence. And that's totally valid. It's about, we have to meet people where they're at. We have to support them with training and development of skills. And we have to get them into connection with each other in a way that's comfortable for them. We can't address mental health and cybersecurity by adding more stress and burden to people's plate in order to get them out of the hole that the industry has dug for them. So I want to really acknowledge those pieces, and lastly say that the goal of the Mental Health and Cybersecurity Foundation is to normalize these conversations, is to be a megaphone for the people on the front lines, that senior level management doesn't have or choose to get visibility on. And so I will, before we jump into the Q&A, I will share a link briefly to our LinkedIn, where you can see what resources we're providing, join our community of practice meetings, just some opportunities where we can, build a supportive community. Here comes the link to everybody. There it is. All right, we have a few questions coming in. So panel, again, let's try to keep our input now as the start of a conversation. Plant a seed, 30 seconds when you weigh in, and we don't all have to weigh in on every question, of course. So we'll start it with there, which is how do we build trust? What do we do about burnout? Question from Matthew is, any thoughts or experience with neurodiversity and how those challenges align with, in areas other than cybersecurity, other areas of business, sales, finance? Like, where does neurodiversity play into this conversation?
I think it's kind of a little bit like it's about neurodiversity, or if aligning to other business areas, sales, finance, and even I think Dinis said something there about improving communications with senior management. It's about understanding the people that you work with. What are their communication needs? What are their communication styles? How do they want to be communicated to? What are their priorities? So therefore, there's no point in talking technical to a senior manager who has an operational priority to get a bunch of trucks moving, for example. So it's about trying to appreciate the viewpoint of other people that you work with, regardless. I think that's a bit of a sweeping statement, but hopefully you understand where I'm coming from.
Completely in agreement with Bex. About the neurodiversity, it's an area that's fairly new for me, I'm going to be honest, but all I've always done is make sure that I respect every person in the team, every person that I work with, and also find out what communication works best for them by making sure I approach every person as an individual, not a resource.
Wow, powerful. Thank you both.
Can I chip into that? I mean,
all right, Cash, you're our last person to weigh in on this question.
I think that's actually that's such an important part, to not look at people as objects, but as people themselves, because that's also one of the signs of leading to burnout, where you distance yourself from distancing.
Yeah. And it's how people are wired. It's not wrong to see people that way if that's how you've been trained. So we have to also think about the skills and the training in order to bring people into that perspective. We're going to move to the next question. Thoughts on teams that create a lot of stress for themselves because they take ownership of risks that should be owned by another part of the business, budgets, roadmaps, and so forth. So Pete, if you want to jump in as the lead on that answer, and we'll take a couple other perspectives and ask you to continue keeping it brief. You're so talented that you're able to do that.
Sure, no problem. So our business is organized. Right? Our businesses are organized. There's departments to do things. There's teams within the departments to do things. And they organize themselves by need to be as efficient as possible. So as leaders, we need to be doing the same thing. We need to create the structures necessary to support the business and support the vision and our strategy. And by sharing what we need to do in order to protect the business, to make the business resilient, with the business leaders, we should get the support to enable us to do that, funding support, etc.
Yeah,
I hope that was in 30 seconds. I don't have a timer.
I agree, Peter. I think the word we're talking about here is trust. Quite often people take on things because they worry too much about whether or not they think another department is capable of doing it, and they think they need to do it because they're perfectionists. And it's again back to the feeling of trusting your team, your colleagues within your team, and your colleagues within the business. So it's back to the word of trust, I think.
And I'll add perspective here, which is like we need to take some risks, interpersonal risks, because the way we're currently operating, is creating these existing challenges. So we have to be trying something different, and some of that includes trusting other business units, other teams to support our work. All right, I see panelists ready for another question. Views on using, and I think I'm going to try to combine these just for the sake of time. The role of AI and large language learning models, whether it's actually the communication piece or the training piece. So I'll leave it to us to navigate that and give you all 1 minute since it's a pretty big, complex question. We'll have a few minutes left if there's a final question that anyone would like to post. So the role of AI and LLMs and so forth in both the kind of breaking down these barriers and supporting teams and individuals, and also on the learning side, back to the word nibbles sticks out to me of right time nibbles.
Yeah, and I also think with large learning models, are we at the stage where they are not going to give you something that is a generic, here's how you train all people in this type of thing? My take on that is that with training, if you're doing it in such a way that it's very delivered at the last minute, but you're also part of that training program is asking people what it means for them in their particular role. To me, that's personalizing training at a very individual level, but you can do it as part of a group. So it's about asking those people to actually put themselves in the situation of how's this going to work for you in your job. And if you can get them to start thinking about that, you're going to get a lot quicker transfer of training to the workplace than anything that sort of generically comes from a large language model. How long that's going to be that way and how it's going to be in the future is anybody's guess. I'm just not quite sure that generative AI is quite where we need it to be just yet.
Great, Paul. Paul, take it from there. Thanks, Beck.
Okay, yeah, totally agree with that. I'm going to go back to the word I used before, trust, but this time it's trust but verify. They are only tools, and people need to remember that they are only tools. They should not be your panacea. They are tools, and the other things you can use them well or you can use them badly. If you're going to trust major decisions or the way that you're going to improve another colleague's life at work and his skill sets, that's a step too far. There needs to be some kind of human intervention. So I'm going to stick to the phrase trust but verify.
Excellent. Thanks, Paul.
I think it's still a very rudimentary idea I have, and I agree we're still at the very early stages. But I do see some potential for this Gen AI LLMs to be some kind of, let's say, assistant coach, like a digital coach or something like that people could use when they face some kind of challenge. I think it sort of connects also with what Beck said earlier in some sense about this sort of micro-dosed learning where you can apply it in some sense. Perhaps we could speak to this chatbot to get that resource rather than someone having to deliver it.
Yeah, and I think that's actually that's actually on the way. I did a piece of research. I actually took part in a research study earlier on in the year about cognitive behavioural therapy, and it was how does it work with generative AI? And there were some quirks in it. There were some that I knew that I didn't want that answer. I wanted a real human being, but it was surprising with some really basic stuff how effective it was. So I do think that we're moving in the right direction.
I haven't got a huge amount of experience in looking at creating learning paths with Gen AI, but from a little bit of research and learning I've been looking at, it looks like you can actually put yourself in a better position by asking the Gen AI to generate stuff with you in a certain persona, to generate it for you in a certain way, and actually sort of test out how our training lands with a candidate. How effective that is, I don't know. But from my personal experience, what we need to do is create opportunities for people to experiment. We need to create safe spaces and a strategy and a campaign that helps encourage all of our people that are working in this space or working around this space to be able to come up with initiatives, do them in a controlled fashion with feedback into the rest of the business and benefit the wider group.
And Peter, I'll take that cue to say that we need to all be in this together. We need to learn together, we need to grow together, and we need to support each other. And that's the reason we put this panel on, and acknowledgement to the Open Security Summit, Dinis and Ilona and their team for bringing us into this space and giving us an opportunity to share our perspective. For those who attended in real time and were able to share their questions, for those streaming, watching, engaging in this work, again, find our group on LinkedIn to see what we're up to and other opportunities to be in community, to be in support. You can even maintain some anonymity as you enter into these conversations and build your confidence to be able to share your experiences and what you need, and also to reach outside of your organization, because not all support needs to come internally, especially initially. And so we want to provide as many opportunities for everybody to feel like they're not in this alone, and that we're all in this together.
Yeah, thanks everybody for doing this session. I think it's super important, and some really great points that you raised. And look, please come up with more ideas for these panels, right? I think it's really important. I think this was a good one to set the stage, but let's try to come up with others where we can bring other people in the industry. One area that I think would be really interesting to talk about is how you could also bring a lot of talent into cybersecurity. I feel that one of the areas I always try to focus a lot is I say we don't have a skills shortage, we have a skills transfer shortage. And I think there's also people talk about imposter syndrome, but I heard about this trespasser syndrome, where there's a lot of individuals that don't even think they should be there. They think they're trespassing on other industries. But when, and as a CISO, when I hire, right, like what I care about is people's ability to change, how they work as a team, how they learn fast, how they interact with the business, how they can, learn very fast, skills, work under pressure. Like I haven't mentioned anything related to cybersecurity, right? So I think there's a lot of other talent and industries that we can learn a lot. And I feel that this industry is just getting more and more serious because the stakes are getting higher and higher. And I think we need to bring a lot of talent in that also has a sense of calm, right? Like I always, for example, hire people that come from the health sector, right? Like somebody who worked on a hospital or work in an emergency yard, they know pressure, right? Somebody, once we hire a firefighter, right? Like that person knows how to deal with pressure, right? And I think we need to bring a lot that talent, which is us. I was asking about the training and some of the customized environments, because what we need to be better is just upskilling them very fast, right? And also upskilling people across different areas and different industries, so we can cross-fertilize, get somebody from GRC to do incident response to the risk, to AppSec, to do all this. I think we need to be much better at that cross-fertilization, right? Because it brings perspective, right? And just one final thought for me is that the thing I learned, which I found interesting, was that we all talk about creating diverse teams. The problem is if you make a really good diverse team, they almost want to kill each other, because by definition, they're all diverse. So you then need to find a way to manage, in a way, that diversity, right? Which is very healthy, but it introduces other elements of pressure, right? Because people, have different perspectives, right? But this is a very important topic, and thank you very much for doing this.